Hey everyone, and welcome back to 15-Minute Discourse. For today's deep dive, we're tackling something that's honestly been kind of blowing my mind as I've been getting ready for this robot ethics.
Yeah, I can see that it's one of those things that was like pure sci-fi forever, and now it's like right here.
Right. It's like
Yeah.
it's knocking on the door, and we're not really sure if we should answer. We've got like a whole stack of articles and research here, and it's just wild to see how much this field has just like exploded.
Right.
I mean, we're talking self-driving cars, having to make like life or death decisions, robots in healthcare, the military. There's even an article in here about robot rights. Is that even a thing? Do we need to worry about that yet?
Even if it sounds a little out there right now, what I think is so fascinating is that robot ethics, it's not just about like making sure robots don't go bad.
Yeah.
Like in the movies. It's about like how they actually fit into society, how their actions impact us on like a much bigger level.
Okay, so let's unpack this a little bit before we like get into all this.
Yeah.
How are we even defining a robot? What is a robot in this context? Because my Roomba seems pretty smart sometimes, but I'm guessing it doesn't qualify for like a Merle code.
Right, we have to draw some lines here. The source material we have defines a robot as a machine that can sense, think, and act.
Okay.
So your Roomba is sensing the room, but its thinking is pretty basic programming. The key difference here is autonomy. Can the robot make its own decisions based on the information it's gathering?
So that's where the ethics start to get a little
That's where it gets tricky.
tricky, right?
Yeah.
Because if a robot is making choices,
Mhm.
whose ethics are we talking about?
Yeah,
Is it the programmer,
right.
the user? Does the robot itself have any say?
That's the core of the debate. One of the sources makes a distinction between robot ethics and machine ethics. Robot ethics gets into whether robots can be moral agents, like responsible for their actions. Can you really blame a robot for
Yes.
doing something wrong if it was just following its programming?
Right, that's a good point.
Yeah.
I mean, like if I could just reprogram a robot to lie,
Right.
does it even understand honesty in the first place?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It raises the question of can robots have their own moral compass, or if it's all about like the rules we give them.
And speaking of rules, it seems like every time we have some major tech leap,
Mm-hmm.
the ethical side of things kind of takes a while to catch up.
Yeah.
It's like with social media,
Right.
we're still figuring out the rules of the road years later.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a pattern that you see with robotics too?
Absolutely. One of the sources brings up the Human Genome Project, which launched in 1990. But it wasn't until 2008 that there was a law passed to protect people from discrimination based on their genetic information. So for 18 years, we had this incredibly powerful technology with very few ethical guidelines in place.
So we're kind of playing catch up with the ethics then. That's kind of alarming when you think about how fast robotics is developing.
It is, and that's why it's so important to be proactive about robot ethics.
Okay.
We need to be having these discussions now,
Right.
anticipating the problems, rather than reacting after something happens.
Okay, I'm all for being prepared, but let's get real for a second. Does it even really matter if a decision is made by a robot or a human, as long as the outcome is the same? Like if my loan application gets rejected,
Right.
is it less upsetting if it's an algorithm versus like a grumpy loan officer?
It might be more than just about the outcome.
Oh.
One source talks about automated job application systems.
Okay.
And even if the algorithm is totally fair, there's something dehumanizing about being judged by a machine.
Yeah, I get that. It's like you're missing that human element, that sense of being understood, even if you disagree with the decision.
Exactly. And that becomes even more significant when you're talking about things like criminal sentencing,
Yeah,
medical diagnoses,
right.
social work,
Yeah.
like areas where human connection really matters.
So it's about more than just making sure robots are following the rules.
Yeah.
It's about how their actions are impacting us on a human level,
Exactly.
even if it seems like it's a purely logical decision on their part.
Right. One source even mentions a potential human right to meaningful human contact.
Wow.
Like as robots take on more roles in our lives,
Yeah.
are we going to need safeguards like this to make sure we don't lose that essential human connection?
That's a pretty deep question. And it makes me think about this whole classic ethical dilemma,
Mm-hmm.
the trolley problem.
Oh, yeah.
Have you heard of that one?
I've heard of it. Yeah.
Okay, so imagine like a runaway trolley barreling down the tracks.
Uh-huh.
And there are 5 people tied to the tracks. And you can pull a lever to divert the trolley
Okay.
onto a side track.
Yeah.
But there's one person tied to that track. So the question is, Do you sacrifice one to save five, or do you do nothing?
It's incredibly relevant to robot ethics, especially with self-driving cars.
Exactly.
They might face situations where they need to make split-second decisions
Yeah.
that could result in harm no matter what they choose.
So how do you program a car to make that kind of choice? Like, is there even a right answer?
Well, that's the point of the trolley problem, isn't it? It makes us think about how complicated moral decision-making is.
Yeah.
The sources we have don't offer any easy solutions.
Right.
And they point out how different ethical framework might lead to totally different answers to this problem.
What I found really interesting is that one source pointed out how people tend to say that they would sacrifice the one to save the five,
Right.
but then they also say that they wouldn't want their own car to make that choice if they were the one on the sidetrack.
It's that self-preservation instinct, right? Suddenly the abstract ethical dilemma gets very personal, and it just shows how hard it is to program something as complex as human morality into a machine.
Yeah. It almost feels like we're asking robots to be more ethical than we are.
Right.
But
yeah.
Isn't there a risk that we go too far with this? What if we're so focused on all the what-ifs that we end up stifling innovation in robotics altogether?
That's a valid concern. And the sources do talk about how overregulation could slow down progress. We don't want to be so caught up in hypotheticals that we miss out on all the good things these technologies can do.
This seems like a balancing act. Like, we need to be mindful of the ethical risks, but we also don't want to, like, hold back progress out of fear.
The key here is responsible innovation. It's not about ignoring the risks. It's about approaching the development and use of robots in a way that makes ethics a top priority.
Okay, so what does that look like in practice? How do we go from these, like, big philosophical discussions to actually building and using robots ethically?
Well, transparency is key. We need to be able to understand how these systems work, how they're making their decisions. So that means being able to look under the hood at the algorithms, data that they're using.
So no more, trust me, the algorithm knows best.
Right.
We need to be able to actually see how the robot is making the choices.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that requires collaboration. We need people from different fields, ethicists, engineers, social scientists, working together to come up with ethical guidelines and standards.
It sounds like we need a whole new rule book for this robotic world that we're building.
And they need to be adaptable because technology is always changing. So our ethical frameworks have to change too.
Right, so it's an ongoing conversation.
Yeah, not a one-time fix.
Now, what about the public in all this? Like, most people aren't sitting around debating the trolley problem. How do we get everyone involved in, like, shaping this ethical landscape of robotics?
Public engagement is super important. We need to teach people about these technologies, demystify them, and encourage open discussions about the benefits and the risks. So going beyond the technical stuff and really exploring the social and ethical implications of living in a world with robots.
Yeah, more deep dives like this one.
Exactly. The more we can encourage informed public discourse, the better off we'll be as a society to handle these ethical complexities.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about the potential downsides, the risks we need to be aware of. But let's flip the script for a second.
Okay.
Are there ways that robots can actually help us become more ethical?
That's a great question. Some experts believe that AI could actually help us overcome our own biases and limitations, leading to fairer decisions in certain areas.
So robots as, like, moral compasses.
It's an interesting thought. Imagine an AI system that helps judges make more fair sentencing decisions.
Wow.
Or doctors diagnose patients more accurately,
Yeah.
free from those unconscious biases that we all struggle with.
That's a pretty optimistic view. But are we really talking about robots having a sense of morality? Or are they just following a set of pre-programmed rules, even if those rules are, like, super ethical?
That's a key distinction, isn't it? Right now, AI operates based on algorithms and data.
Right.
But there's a whole field of research looking into artificial moral agents, systems that can actually reason about ethical principles, and maybe even learn and adapt their own moral frameworks over time.
Are we really anywhere close to, like, creating robots that can actually understand?
It's still early days, but there have been some amazing advancements in AI research. We're seeing breakthroughs in machine learning, natural language processing, even cognitive modeling, and all of that is laying the groundwork for more sophisticated ethical AI systems.
But even if we could create robots that were perfectly ethical, wouldn't that open up a whole other can of worms?
Yeah, it's a good
I
question.
mean, what does it even mean for a machine to be ethical?
Right.
And what happens if their idea of ethics clashes with ours?
If we're talking about robots with their own sense of morality, we're
Oh,
talking
yeah.
about a huge shift in how we think about technology. It's not just about us programming them to follow our rules anymore. It's about recognizing that they might come up with their own values and beliefs, which might not always be the same as ours.
So are we basically talking about sharing the planet with another intelligent species that might have its own ideas about right and wrong?
That's the billion-dollar question, isn't it? And that's why robot ethics is so important.
Right.
We need to be having these conversations now and working towards a future where humans and robots can exist together ethically and in a way that benefits everyone.
But isn't there a danger that we go too far with all of this?
Oh, for sure. There's a flip side.
Like, what if we get so caught up in the what-ifs that we end up stifling innovation altogether?
That's a valid concern, and the sources do talk about the potential for overregulation to backfire.
Okay.
You know, we don't want to create so many rules and restrictions that we prevent these technologies from developing and potentially benefiting society.
So it's a balancing act.
It is a delicate one.
We need to be mindful of the ethical risks,
Yes.
but we also don't want to hold back progress just because we're afraid.
Exactly. It's about finding that sweet spot.
Okay, so how do we do that? How do we move from these big philosophical discussions
Right.
to actually building and using robots ethically?
Well, one key is transparency. We need to understand how these systems are making their decisions, how the algorithms work, what data they're using.
So no more, trust me, the algorithm knows best.
Right. We need to be able to look under the hood.
So we need to be able to understand the reasoning behind the robot's choices.
Exactly. We can't just accept these decisions blindly.
And does that require collaboration,
I think so.
like between different fields?
Absolutely.
Great.
We need ethicists,
Right.
engineers, social scientists, legal experts.
So basically all hands on deck.
Yeah, we all need to be working together to figure out how to navigate this new landscape.
It sounds like we almost need a new set of rules
We do, a new ethical framework.
for this world that we're creating.
And those rules need to be flexible because technology is always evolving. So our ethical thinking needs to evolve along with it.
Right. It's not a one-time fix.
It's an ongoing conversation.
It's a process.
Exactly.
And how do we bring the public into this conversation?
That's a great question.
Most people aren't like sitting around debating the trolley problem.
Right, it's not exactly dinner table conversation.
But they're going to be impacted by these technologies.
They are, whether they realize it or not.
So how do we get them involved?
Well, I think education is key.
Okay.
We need to make sure people understand these technologies, how they work, what the implications are, and we need to encourage open and honest discussions.
About the benefits and the risks.
Exactly. It's about having an informed public.
So we need to demystify AI
Yeah, take away the fear and the hype.
and get people talking about these issues.
Exactly. That's how we create a society that's prepared to handle the ethical challenges of AI.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about the potential downside,
The things that could go wrong.
the risks we need to be aware of. But let's shift gears for a moment.
Okay.
Are there ways that robots can actually help us become more ethical?
That's an interesting question. And it might sound counterintuitive, but some experts believe that AI could actually help us overcome some of our own biases.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And limitations.
So robots is like ethical guides.
It's a possibility, maybe even a probability.
Interesting.
Is-
So AI could help us be more objective.
Exactly. It could help us see things more clearly.
But are we really talking about robots having a sense of morality?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Or are they just following a set of pre-programmed rules,
Mm-hmm.
even if those rules are super ethical?
It's a key distinction.
Right.
And it gets at the heart of what it means for a machine to be ethical. Right now, AI operates based on algorithms and data, but there's a whole field of research exploring the possibility of artificial moral agents, systems that can actually reason about ethical principles,
Wow.
and potentially even learn and adapt those principles over time.
Are we really at the point where we could create robots that can actually understand and apply Ethics?
No, it's still early days in this field, but there have been some pretty incredible breakthroughs in AI research.
Yeah.
We're seeing advancements in machine learning, natural language processing, cognitive modeling.
So things are moving quickly.
They are, which is why it's so important to have these conversations now before these technologies get too far ahead of us.
But even if we could create robots that were perfectly ethical, wouldn't that create a whole new set of challenges?
I think it would.
I mean, what does it even mean for a machine to be ethical?
Right. It's a question that philosophers have been grappling with for centuries.
Yeah.
And now we're having to apply those questions to machines.
And what happens if their idea of ethics clashes with ours?
That's another big question. Are we prepared for the possibility that AI might develop its own moral code?
That's a pretty mind-blowing idea.
It is. It challenges everything we thought we knew about morality.
So we're not just talking about programming robots with our own ethics.
Right.
We're talking about the possibility that they might evolve beyond that programming and develop their own sense of right and wrong.
It's a fundamental shift in how we think about the relationship between humans and machines. This is the future we're heading towards.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We have. It's a big topic.
It's like we've gone from killer robots to robot rights, from the trolley problem to robots judging use on our ethics.
And everything in between.
I don't know about you, but my head is spinning a little bit.
It's a lot to process, for sure.
So for our listeners who are like just starting to wrap their heads around all this, what are the key takeaways here? Like, what should we be thinking about as we encounter more and more robots in our daily lives?
Well, I think the most important thing is to stay informed.
Okay.
Stay engaged.
So knowledge is power.
It really is in this case. This isn't something we can just ignore and hope it goes away.
We can't just bury our heads in the sand.
Exactly. We need to be active participants in shaping this future,
Okay.
not passive bystanders.
So we need to understand the technology,
Yeah,
but also think critically about its impact on society.
absolutely. It's about more than just the nuts and bolts.
And, we talked about all these ethical frameworks and principles. Are there any specific guidelines that people can use in their own interactions with robots? Like, even if robots aren't people yet, should we still be treating them and the people who work with them with respect?
I think respect is a fundamental principle,
Okay.
whether we're talking about humans or machines. But I think some other key considerations are things like transparency, fairness, accountability. We need to understand how these systems are making decisions, make sure those decisions are fair, and hold the people who create and use these systems accountable.
For the consequences.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's about responsibility.
And what about that idea we were talking about earlier, about AI developing its own ethical frameworks?
Right.
Is that something we should be genuinely worried about?
I think it's something we need to take seriously. As these systems get more sophisticated, more autonomous, it's conceivable that they could develop their own values, their own decision-making processes.
Right.
And those might not always line up with our own.
So it's not just about programming robots with our ethics.
Right.
We need to be prepared for the possibility that they might evolve beyond that programming and come up with their own sense of morality.
It's a pretty radical idea.
It really is.
It changes how we think about ethics in general.
Yeah.
It's not about us dictating the rules anymore.
Right.
It's about negotiating those rules.
With intelligent machines.
It's a whole new world.
Okay, that's both exciting and a little terrifying.
It is. It's both.
So what can we do to prepare for this future?
Well, I think continued research is essential, especially interdisciplinary research, bringing together ethicists, computer scientists, social scientists, legal experts, policymakers.
So it's not just a tech issue.
Not at all. It's a human issue.
It's about society as a whole.
Exactly.
And it sounds like this needs to be a global conversation.
Absolutely. AI and robotics are global technologies. So we need international collaboration to establish ethical standards and guidelines.
So it's a big task ahead of us.
It is, but I think it's a task worth undertaking.
All right, so we've got a lot of work to do.
We do.
But I gotta say, even with all the potential challenges, I'm still feeling optimistic about the possibilities here. If we can navigate these ethical waters successfully,
Yeah.
AI and robotics have the potential to make our world a better place.
In so many ways.
They really do.
From healthcare to education to climate change, the possibilities are endless.
But we have to do it thoughtfully,
We do.
ethically,
Yes, responsibility has to be at the forefront.
to ensure that these advancements benefit everyone.
Exactly, not just a select few.
And on that note, I think we've reached the end of our robot ethics deep dive.
That went by fast.
I want to thank you for sharing your expertise with us.
Did give my pleasure.
It's been a really thought-provoking conversation.
I agree.
And to our listeners, thanks for joining us on this journey.
Yes, thank you.
We hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity.
And maybe even raise some new questions.
That's what 15-minute discourse is all about.
Absolutely.
But don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this episode with your friends
Spread the word.
so we can keep this conversation going.
Yes, keep the discourse alive.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and we'll see you back here for another deep dive into a fascinating topic